Me to begin my argument in three, two, one. The government side of the House has failed to explaining how certain crime that has been mentioned and defined, which is gambling, prostitution, and addiction, this also has an impact for the society, not just only for themselves. It is necessary to also addressing the social impact this victimless crime done. Therefore, we at the opposition side of the House would proudly and clearly opposing the motion that stated how the government would decriminalize victimless crime. Now, before I jump into my argument, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Reydivya, and I will be your leader of opposition. And again, it is necessary to understand how Indonesia is a nation that rooted in Pancasila values and also believing in God and human dignity. Such crimes like prostitution or gambling is against the prospect of morality and dignity that most majority of Indonesia people uphold. Furthermore, we also need to address what exactly these crimes, which is gambling, prostitution, or addiction, are about. Prostitution in this current era, even though it's consensual, will lead into coercion, trafficking, or economic desperation. Even though it is consensual and voluntary for the concept itself, but prostitution itself could be a way of suggesting an increased demand for commercial sex. Within the status quo itself, there has been an undercover of prostitution network which is involving an underage girls. Moreover, for how prostitution would exploit vulnerable people is by the health impact also. There will be an increase of the outspread of STE if we are not decriminalizing prostitution. Or STI in this context itself is sexually transmitted infection. Now, if you are talking about gambling, we should know how, even though it's voluntary, gambling often leads to financial ruin, crimes, and domestic violence. How? Many gambling networks are targeted low-income family or person. Problem gambling often results in substantial debt, and also how gambling works is the compulsive beating and loses. The possibility of gambling creating a cycle of violence is very high because it could trigger violence, and violence can be in turn be a coping mechanism for those who experience gambling harm or losing by losing from gambling. Now, the government of the House also stating how if we criminalize those persons who involved in those crimes, such as prostitution, gambling, or addiction, could lead them to fit into the stigmatization of the society in Indonesia. Ladies and gentlemen, it is necessary to understand how it is one of the example about how every crimes or every situation condition has the risk itself. Therefore, society risk is the example about what exactly is these crimes will cause also. And it is something that the victim person or the user or those who experience this victim need to address and experience at the same time. Similarly, if we are talking about addiction, even though it's not just a personal issue, but we should address it not just as a personal issue, but a public health crisis at the same time. Drug addiction could contribute to the spread of diseases like HIV, and also crimes, and also a mental health decline. Criminalizing this behavior sends a strong societal message about upholding moral values while protecting vulnerable individuals from exploitation, abuse, and further criminality. Furthermore, decriminalizing these crimes could lead to a rise in crime rates, particularly as gambling addiction could lead to theft, drug users resort to criminal acts to fund their habits, and prostitution network grows more sophisticated. Beyond the criminalization itself, preventive measures like public education campaign, community engagement, and school programs should focus on raising awareness about the risks associated with this behavior. And therefore, criminalizing this victimless crime would be the most effective way. The government should also invest in rehabilitation for those affected, offering counseling, job training, and support programs to help individuals transition out of these activities, particularly those involved in prostitution or drug use. Moreover, enhancing law enforcement by creating special task force, increasing surveillance, and utilizing digital monitoring technologies would allow authorities to better check and dismantle illegal networks. There has been a reason why we should not decriminalize victimless crime. Instead, we should decriminalize this victimless crime for its reason. It is also necessary to understand how criminalizing victimless crime is not the example of it is not just by imprisoning those people who does this crime, because there's also so many ways such as rehabilitation, surveillance, and so forth, and the governments are also addressing that. Therefore, we at the opposite side of the house strongly believe that we should criminalize victimless crime for its reason. Thank you so much for attention. We will be good to oppose this motion.